What we're doing is setting up a load cell. So we're getting the wires coming from the load cell. So here we've got the plastic shroud and then the exposed wires within it. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to solder these up to the load cell amplifier circuit board. So here we're going to clamp the circuit board. So make sure you don't clamp onto any electronics. That's why I'm doing it on the corner there. Always check it before you clamp. And now the actual wires coming from the load cell, we're going to solder them up using a soldering iron. So now always keep your soldering iron clean. The cleaner the better. It's good to be pedantic about that. If you have big blobs of solder on it and you go to wire up a circuit board, it can spill over and it just causes problems. So in here we're tinning the wires. So the actual individual wires coming out of that plastic shroud from the load cell, they're what we're going to solder. So for each one, hopefully the wires will be exposed already. If not, it's easy. Just get your wire stripper and strip it. And what we do now is we actually just touch each of the wires with the soldering iron and the solder. And what will happen is you'll see a little bit of the solder actually just spreads over the wire itself, the metal exposed part, and just makes it form one part. Because what happens is those individual wires that are coming out of it with the color coding, each one of them has multiple strands of wire within it. So we want to twist them up and tin it with some solder. That allows us to easily push it through the little holes on the circuit board. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to do all 5 at once coming from the load cell. So here we push the tin wires through. So I'm going basically color for color. So don't necessarily trust the colors. Always check the load cell manufacturer's specifications. It's really, really simple. Don't be scared off by that. Black and red are pretty much standard. Black is always ground and red is pretty much always the actual voltage power supply. So if you think of them like a battery. Then the other colors, there is a standard color code, but again, check the load cell manufacturer specs. If you have any doubt, just flick them an email. They'll tell you which one's which. So I'm doing them all at once just because it speeds things up for me. So I've pushed them through and now I'm actually going to snip the top of them off. So when you push them through, make sure that the plastic shroud for each of the individual wires, so the colored plastic shroud, make sure it's pushed right up against the circuit board. So here you'll see I'm putting my hand over to stop the bits I snip flying off. It's a really good idea to wear safety goggles or something like that. You don't want things getting in your eye. So now they're ready to go. They're all pushed up through. It's ready to solder. You'll see I've got the yellow wire. That's a electronic magnetic sort of interference sort of cable coming from that long black plastic shroud coming from the load cell. You may or might not have that 5th wire. So here we're going to actually solder the board. It's really simple. Clean up your soldering iron, and then all you need to do is actually just touch where the wire comes through with the soldering iron, and then just tap it with the actual solder itself. And what will happen is you get a nice little small dome of solder which will lock that wire into place. So there's the 5 of them there. So the reason you do it quick is so you don't overheat the circuit board. Don't leave your soldering iron on there for 30-40 seconds. Do it nice and quick. So you'll see they're all in quite nicely and they're ready to go. So now I'm going to rotate the board over to wire up the other side. So again, check those electronic components. They can be pretty close to those corners. So be really careful about it. So now we're going to actually prepare the wires for the other side. So this is going to connect the Arduino to the circuit board. Now one end is tinned and the other is pinned. So these jumper wires are fantastic for this purpose. So I love them when you're hooking up to Arduino. So you just chop them in half and then you strip the wire. Don't use scissors, make sure you get a proper wire stripper. That's T-Rex style. And what you'll see is I'm taking off sort of 3 to 4 millimeters of that plastic around the wire. So you'll see it's quite simple. Just put it in there. The T-Rexes are great because they automatically adjust to the width of the wire. And then, for the vast majority of times, they work perfectly. So what we do is we expose that wire inside, and that's what you soldered up in the last instance. So if your load cell wires weren't stripped, you need to do this part for them. So you'll strip it, and then the best thing to do is twist it. So just hold it in one hand and twist it with the other. So it's really, really quite easy. The reason we do that is to keep all of those individual strands of the actual metal together. If you don't twist it around, they can sort of fray and go off, and that's a problem because it can fray and go across the different colored wires and short circuit it, which can blow your board up. And when I say blow it up, it's not going to explode, but it just short circuits it and stops it from working. So here we go. So now we're going to tin it. So it's exact same process as for the last one. So this time I'm going to do them one at a time. So then I'm just checking the clamps. Always use the weakest possible clamps, I suppose, for this part. Because if you use a really strong clamp with that can potentially pierce the plastic, it can expose some of the wires, and you just prefer not to do that. So here I'm just going to tin it. So it's using soldering again. Heat that metal up, and then just touch it with a solder. You'll see a little burst of smoke. So this is a really cheap soldering iron. Everything I've got here is pretty much as cheap as you can possibly get it to show it can be done on a budget. So you can't control the heat with those sort of soldering irons, so they might be a bit hotter than you'd normally prefer. So again, as before, you insert the wire, give it a snip. There we go, and now I'm about to tap it with the solder. So again, clean it, then touch that wire tip coming up through the hole. There'll be a little tiny bit exposed. Then tap it with the solder. If you cleaned it a bit too recently, it cools it down. So now it's heating up, there you can see. Bang, there we got a little dome. Looks beautiful. Make sure the solder's not going across those little circles, those little holes. If you end up with a blob going across it, you can get stuff called flux, which allows you to basically suck out the solder and start again. If not, you can just heat it up and just scrape it off. It's not that difficult to undo those sorts of mistakes. And these larger circuit boards like this are quite forgiving compared to some of the other things you may want to solder once you get the hang of it. So again, tipping that wire, and then I'm going to thread it through just like with the other one. Giving it a snip. So yeah, as you can see, pretty much every time I do it, I end up bumping it, so I need to redo it again. But again, you just push the wire up through and it should sit nicely there. Getting the soldering iron out and heating it up and applying the solder. You'll also notice I don't have the soldering iron in the station I'm working with the clamps. I mentioned that in the notes. You will eventually burn your hands if you put the solder in the same one you're clamping with, because you'll have a soldering iron in one hand and then you'll actually go to move the clamps and you'll grab it. Or maybe it's just me. Here I've sped it up just to show you the final two. I'm trying to show you every single step of it without being overly boring. So there we go. Number 3, and then we'll finish off with number 4. There we go. Tipping it, putting it up through there, and give it a little snip. So now put the soldering iron. There we go. So now we've got all of our tabs done. So now make sure you turn your soldering iron off. Do not burn your house down, please, or your university. So it's all soldered. It's now being checked. Looks good. Time for the Arduino. This is the actual really easy part. Now all we're going to do is follow the circuit diagram which I provided, which shows the color coding. That's just showing some of the labels on it. It's a bit out of focus, my apologies, but it shows you the writings on the side if you get confused. So here, really simple, and that's why I use the colors. We go VCC to 5 volts, which is power supply. GND to GND, which is the ground. So if you think of those as the two parts of the battery, the positive and the negative being ground. Then we go data to digital pin 3. So that's the sort of, in this example, it's sort of a whitey, that one there. It just has a grey line on it, but it's white. So that goes to digital pin 3. And then clock, CLK, goes to digital pin 2. So really, really straightforward. And that's it. It's wired up. So that's the circuit diagram there. You can see the different wiring that needs to be done. Very straightforward. And now it's ready to plug into your computer and actually collect some data from. All right, good luck with it.